Black woman helps CEO on the road. What he sees on her wrist changes everything. Do you believe in destiny or injustice that comes unexpectedly? Write in the comments, because what you're going to see now isn't just a story. It's a warning disguised as a coincidence. Imagine a rural road, the sun disappearing over the horizon, and the silence being broken only by the insistent noise of a broken-down car. A white man with a rumpled suit and a face marked by arrogance gestures desperately next to a stopped luxury car. He didn't know, but the real collapse wasn't in the engine. Before we dive into the story that will give you goosebumps, tell me, where are you watching it from? Right here in the comments. It's always exciting to see how far stories like this can go. Now tell me, do you also get angry when you see someone being judged just by the color of their skin? So leave a like if you believe that no one should go through this. This helps spread this message and show that there are many of us in the fight against prejudice. And take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. There are a lot of real and impactful stories coming. Michael couldn't bear to lose control. He was used to giving orders, being listened to, respected, feared even. And now here, standing in the middle of nowhere, he had just been saved by someone he would never have considered useful. It stirred something inside him, something he couldn't hide. Pride, prejudice, maybe both. Breathing heavily, he tried hard to look grateful, but all that came out was a superior comment. Look, you're lucky. These cars are sensitive. One mistake, and you could have made everything worse. She just stared at him. Her silence was uncomfortable, almost defiant. But it wasn't arrogance. It was lucidity. A type of calm that was born from experience, from someone who had already been judged 1,000 times just for existing. Do you always treat people who help you like this? The question came, out low, firm, almost like a polite slap. Michael raised his eyebrows, forcing a laugh. I just said it's a sophisticated car. Not everyone understands. Prejudice slipped through his words with the naturalness of someone who had never been confronted. Of course, she replied, looking back at the engine like someone who sees beyond the rust, beyond the mechanics, like someone who sees intentions. Michael snorted. He looked at his cell phone once again, frustrated that he still had no signal. The situation was ridiculous, I thought. Stranded in a remote place, saved by a black woman who seemed to know more about his car than any engineer at the factory. That didn't make sense in his head. Do you work with this? He asked, trying to find a reason to justify what had just happened. No, she replied, giving a small smile. I only paid attention while my father worked, and I never underestimated what an unresolved problem could do. He was silent for a few seconds. I tried to hide the discomfort. He tried to mask the fact that that woman, with grease-stained hands and a serene look, had just dismantled his entire perception of who had value. The bracelet on her wrist still glowed, discreet but present. He didn't know why it caught his attention so much, but I knew I had seen that symbol before. She closed the hood slowly, like someone who finishes a stage and already predicts that the next one will be more complicated. Michael was about to say thank you, perhaps for the first real time, when the question escaped his lips, almost involuntarily. What's your father's name? She looked at him. For the first time, he hesitated. The silence between them grew thick. Why? She replied dryly. He gestured toward the bracelet. It's just this bracelet, this coat of arms. It belongs to my family. And it was at that moment that the tension changed tone. The discomfort from before gave way to something deeper, more disturbing. He began connecting dots that had previously seemed loose. And she, realizing this, took a step back. Not physically, but emotionally, like someone preparing for the impact of a truth that, for a long time, was hidden. But that truth would not yet come now. There was still much to be revealed, and what was about to happen would change everything. If you have already been judged before opening your mouth, comment here. Appearance is deceiving. Character reveals. And if you've experienced something similar, share it in the comments. Your words can be a mirror of many other stories. The sound of the engine running was like a slap in the face to Michael. He expected everything, except that. A simple black woman, with steady hands and worn tools, bringing her million-dollar car back to life with a calm that defied the logic of prejudice. And now, as he stood there, he was forced to face something he had been trying to avoid. The evidence that he had been arrogant, but instead of acknowledging this, he continued, trying to maintain his pose, You were lucky, he repeated, as if his masculinity depended on that phrase. If it were another model, it might not work. She didn't respond. He just walked to her truck, grabbed a bottle of water, took a sip, and stared at the sky. Her silence was more uncomfortable than any direct confrontation. It was a silence of someone who didn't need to prove anything, and that hurt someone like him. That's when his gaze returned to the bracelet. It wasn't your average kind of accessory. Silver, with ancient features, marked by a symbol he had known since childhood, the Grayson coat of arms. A lion with a sword and a star in the background. It was on his sister's wedding invitations, on the dishes in the family home, on the documents he signed as CEO. This bracelet. His voice shook slightly. Where did you get it? She looked at her wrist, as if she had forgotten it was there. He remained silent for a while, as if he was measuring his words before delivering them. It was my father's. He gave it to me when I was little. He said it was the only thing he could give me. Michael swallowed hard. He tried to reason quickly. Was it a coincidence? A similar model? But inside, he knew. That coat of arms was not common. It was exclusive. And if she was saying it was her father's, then that meant, "What's his name?" he asked, with an urgency that he could no longer hide. She looked deep into his eyes, and her tone changed. "What do you want to know for?" He took a deep breath. "Because this symbol belongs to my family, and if he gave you this, there is something very wrong or very hidden in this story." Michael's world seemed to spin in slow motion. He began to remember old conversations, uncomfortable silences at family gatherings, stories that had never been told clearly, an employee who was suddenly fired, an older brother who didn't talk about certain trips. One night he heard his father shouting on the phone and hanging up with teary eyes. The pieces were there. All that was needed was someone to fit them. And for the first time in his life, Michael felt afraid. Not the fear of the unknown, but the fear of the truth. That woman he had just underestimated could be much more than a good mechanic. She could be his blood, a living secret, walking before him asking for nothing, except respect. But it was still too early to be certain, and although the suspicion was planted, what was to come would be even deeper, more disconcerting, more irreversible. The world seemed to have stopped for an instant. The silence was so dense that not even the sound of the wind could pierce it. Michael was there, motionless, eyes fixed on that bracelet as if it were a bomb about to explode. And maybe it was, because deep down, something inside him already knew, something that pride tried to silence, but conscience screamed. This was no coincidence. This was destiny, or reckoning. She, on the other hand, remained calm, but her eyes gave away. Behind the calm there was a sea of memories. That object on her wrist was all she had of her father. There was never a photo, nor a hug, just promises made in whispers and disappeared in time. The bracelet was the only proof that she was once wanted. And now, seeing that white man recognize the symbol he had carried since he was a child, it was as if someone was finally saying out loud, "You didn't imagine all this." Michael took a deep breath. "You said it was your father's. What was his name?" he insisted in a hoarse voice, as if asking for permission to confirm the unthinkable. She hesitated. He felt a tightness in his chest, a strange sensation, as if he were about to open a door that could change everything. Richard Grayson," he replied slowly, as if the words had to travel through a lifetime before reaching him. The name hit Michael like a punch in the gut. His eyes widened. The body seemed to lose strength. For a second, he thought he was going to pass out. That couldn't be true, but it was. The name she had just said was the same as his father's. Not a similar name, was exactly the same. "Are you kidding me?" he asked, with a mixture of disbelief and panic. "That name is my father's." She nodded silently, and he, not knowing where to lean, turned and walked a few steps along the road as if he could escape that revelation. But there was nowhere to run. His mind started racing in 1,000 directions. Would it be possible? Would your father have another daughter? And more than that, had he hidden her existence all these years? He remembered loose stories of visits to small towns during the family's election campaigns, of a maid who was sent away suddenly, without explanation. Everything made sense now, and everything hurt in ways he never imagined. She watched him, not with pity, but with a strange compassion. as someone who understands that the pain of discovery is different from the pain of exclusion, and that he was, for the first time, tasting the bitter taste of what she had lived with her entire life, being ignored, be erased, being reduced to a convenient silence. Michael turned slowly, his face pale, his hands shaking. "What about your mother?" he asked, trying to put the pieces together. "She worked for him?" The voice now no longer had any arrogance. It was almost a request for forgiveness disguised as curiosity. She took a step forward. "My mother cleaned her family's house. She got pregnant. She was fired weeks later. She never saw Richard again, but she gave me that name because she wanted me to know who he was, even though the whole world pretended I didn't exist." The words went through Michael like thin blades. He no longer had shields. That woman was not a stranger. She was a page torn from her family's past, a page that was now returning to claim its space. But what would he do with it? Admit? To deny? Pretend nothing happened? The answer was still far away. But the storm had already begun. She took a deep breath, looking away from the road and facing the past she carried inside her chest. She didn't need that conversation. She survived her entire life without answers. But now, with Michael's eyes fixed on her, as if trying to understand a story that her family had always hidden, something inside her said, "Maybe it's time to talk." "My mother's name was Helena," he began, his voice firm. "She worked in her family's mansion for years. She said it was too big a house for so much emptiness, that the walls held more secrets than paintings." Michael swallowed hard, but said nothing. She continued. "She was young, very pretty, smart too, but invisible, as women like her always were. Invisible until something inconvenient happens." Her eyes were slightly teary, but they didn't waver. "When she got pregnant, there was no discussion, no support, just a sudden dismissal. They said it was due to cutting expenses. But my mother knew. My son's father, that's what she told me years later, was the man who lived in that house, Richard Grayson." Michael lowered his head, not out of shame, yet, but out of impotence. It was as if the entire world he knew was being rewritten with paints he never wanted to see. She returned to her small town with her belly growing and her soul full of questions. She never heard from him again. She never tried to contact him again. All she said was that the world of powerful people has no room for those who come from below. She opened her palm, as if holding something invisible. But one night, when I was about 5 years old, she called me into her room. Her eyes were red. She took this bracelet out of a little box hidden in the back of the closet. She gave it to me and said, "If one day you get lost, use this to remember where you came from. Not the place, but the blood." Michael didn't know where to put his hands. Huddled there, with the truth staring him in the face, he seemed smaller than ever. That woman didn't want anything from him, and perhaps that was what disconcerted him most. She wasn't there for revenge. She just existed, and the fact that it existed was enough to shake everything he thought he knew. My mother died with a broken heart. I grew up watching her hold this secret as if it were a curse. I never lacked love, but I always had silence. And now, out of nowhere, you appear, with the same surname, the same face, and the same reaction. Surprise, doubt, resistance. Michael tried to speak, but the words became jumbled. The confident man from before no longer existed. In his place was a shaken son, a brother in denial, a CEO who for the first time in his life didn't know what to do with the truth. I had no idea. They never told me anything." She nodded. "Of course not. You don't count. You delete." The words hurt more than any direct accusation. He felt it, and she saw it. But this wasn't a war yet. It was a bleeding memory, and like any old wound, if it was not treated truthfully, it would continue to infect generations. Michael didn't know if it was the sweat from the heat or the cold on his spine that was now running down his neck. His eyes, once filled with judgment, were lost, as if for the first time they had truly seen. He staggered to the car, sat in the open driver's seat, took out his cell phone, and with trembling fingers, began typing. I needed confirmation. I needed proof. Because if that were true, then the prejudice he had, carried for years, had just collided with his own story. He called his sister, the only person in the family with whom he still maintained some emotional connection. "Maggie, I need you to send me some old photos. Of the house, of the staff, from when we were little." She found it strange. "Why? What's going on?" He hesitated. "It's serious, Maggie. Send me. Photos of Helena, of the maid who disappeared out of nowhere. On the other end of the line, silence. Maggie, more silence. You know who she was, don't you? He asked, his voice breaking. A sigh passed through the phone, and then the answer. I always knew there was something. Dad never spoke, but one day I heard him crying, murmuring her name, Helena, and saying he had made a mistake he couldn't fix. Michael felt the world spin. Do you have a photo of her? I have. Minutes later, an old image appeared on the screen. It was in black and white. A young woman, with sweet eyes and a firm posture, holding a dish towel in her hand. In the background, the balcony of the family's old mansion. And then, he looked back at the woman in front of him, and he had no more doubts. The resemblance was impossible to deny. The shape of the face, the strong chin, the eyes steady. That woman he underestimated, discredited, treated as if she wasn't worthy of respect, was his sister. The revelation fell upon him with a weight impossible to describe. He felt his heart accelerate, his breathing stop, his mind collapse. How many times had he ignored people like her? How many times did he use harsh words, cold looks, just because they didn't fit the standard he learned to accept? And now, here, standing in front of someone who shared the same blood, he realized that he had not humiliated a stranger. He had humiliated himself. You are my sister, he whispered, as if he was saying to himself, trying to believe it. She didn't respond. There was no need. The silence between them said it all. He stood up slowly, walked a few steps towards her, but stopped. I was afraid. Fear of getting closer and seeing in her eyes the mirror of the prejudice he always ignored. I don't know what to say, he confessed. She crossed her arms, not out of defense, but out of strength. Then don't say anything. Just listen, for once. Michael sat on the floor, there, in the dust, dirty, small, because sometimes, to begin to understand, you first have to fall apart. A few days passed, but the weight of the truth gave Michael no rest. Each meeting at the office was filled with memories of the day on the road. Each look from the team seemed to judge a secret that, until then, only he carried. But secrets don't stay quiet for long, and this one was about to explode. On a Tuesday morning, he was typing an email when he received a notification on his cell phone. Extraordinary meeting scheduled. Council room. Subject: family. Family. The word sounded like thunder. The heart sank. He knew he had touched a past that his mother had spent decades trying to bury. When he entered the room, the tension was palpable. The shareholders were gathered, advisors in silence. And there in the back, sitting impeccably, was his mother, Eleanor Grayson, elegant, haughty, with the same calculated look he inherited. Beside her, discreetly, sat she, the woman who until a few days ago was a stranger, and now her sister. The only difference was that she didn't bow. He was there with his spine straight, like someone who knows he has the right to occupy the space. Michael, the mother began, with a slight tremble in her voice. Could you explain to us the reason for this meeting? He looked around. He took a deep breath. I knew that once I opened my mouth, there would be no going back. I am here to recognize a truth that has been hidden for too long. The room froze. All eyes turned to him. This woman is Richard Grayson's daughter, my father, and therefore my sister. Eleanor's eyes widened, not out of surprise, but out of anger. This is nonsense. You're getting carried away by coincidences, insinuations. There's no proof. She, the sister, calmly opened her bag. He took off the bracelet, then a folder with old documents, handwritten letters signed by Richard, bank receipts in Helena's name, and a photo, the same bracelet, on the same wrist, in a faded image taken in 1994, holding a small girl on her lap. The counselors began to whisper. The tension was unsustainable. This can't be presented like this publicly, Eleanor said, her voice breaking for the first time. It's already public, said the sister. She held up her cell phone. The screen showed notifications from news portals. Grayson heir may have sister out of wedlock. CEO is pressured to speak out. Michael closed his eyes for a second. There was no way to erase it anymore. And, deep down, I didn't even want to. The company is named after our family. But what family is this if it lives denying its own ties? Eleanor stood up, furious. She doesn't belong in this world. But I belong to his blood. replied the sister without raising her voice. And that? Not even your money can change. Silence fell like a veil. Michael looked at the counselors, then at her. He knew the decision was in his hands, not just about the company, but about what he wanted to be from there. But that decision was yet to come. The meeting ended in silence, but the impact echoed through the company corridors like an invisible storm. No official statement had been issued yet, but everyone already knew. The Graysons had a secret, and it now had a name, a face, and a seat at the table. In the following days, the press explored every detail. Rejected daughter of tycoon may take role in family foundation. Inheritance, blood, and reparation, the Graysons' drama exposed. But for her, it wasn't about scandal, it was about justice. It took Michael 2 days to work up the courage. He went up to the penthouse, where the Grayson Foundation operated, a social arm created years ago just for marketing, with no soul, no real purpose. He walked into the boardroom and there she was, looking out the window at the city. Strong, property, unshakable. I thought, he began and his voice trailed off, that perhaps you would accept a place here. She turned slowly, eyes steady. Here? He nodded. At the foundation, as a counselor, or director. You choose. She gave a slight smile. Why? To clean up these company's image or your conscience? He didn't dodge. Because I recognize who you are, and because for the first time, I want this company to serve something that really matters. She crossed her arms. So know that if I accept, it won't be to smile at an event with a billionaire. It will be to change the rules. Michael took a deep breath. That's why I asked. She accepted, but not without first establishing conditions. The first, reformulate the selection criteria for social projects, supported by the foundation, prioritizing young Black people, single mothers, invisible communities. The second, review contracts with outsourced companies involved in processes of structural racism. The third, include a mentoring program for teenagers in historically neglected regions. Many shareholders' eyes widened, but no one dared to question, because here, in that room, she wasn't just a late revelation. She was a Black woman who carried centuries of silence on her shoulders, and who now turned it into action. The press changed its tone. What was once a scandal became a transformation. Headlines appeared. The woman who changed the game in the Grayson family's biggest company. She was invisible. Today, she dictates the new rules of the game. The public was divided. Some saw opportunism, others, justice. But she didn't need anyone's approval. I had already lived enough being judged. Now, it was time to decide. And what she decided with each rule she imposed was that someone like her would never again be ignored in that room. Michael watched her in silence. I still didn't know if that was redemption or consequence, but he knew one thing. She hadn't asked for anything, and yet, it was transforming everything. The meeting room now carried another weight. It was no longer the place where heirs made decisions with impunity. It was the stage for change. Her presence there bothered, challenged, destabilized, but it was impossible to ignore her. The Black woman, who was once erased from her family's stories, now wrote the next pages, and she did so with sharp elegance, like someone who knows the bitter taste of exclusion, but chooses to sweeten the future with justice. Michael watched everything from afar. On the outside, he maintained the role of CEO. Inside, he was just another son trying to understand the inheritance he received and the responsibility he now carried. He saw his sister speak to NGO leaders, talk to young people in social projects, visit communities he himself had never set foot in. She did everything without fuss, without boasting, but with a kind of strength that you don't learn at a shareholder meeting. One night, alone in his office, he opened the drawer where he kept personal belongings and saw an old picture frame with his father's photo. Beside it, the same bracelet that was now on her wrist. The image of the engraved coat of arms was reflected in the metal surface of the frame, like a silent reminder that the power they so idolized was always linked to the omission of a truth. He asked himself, what if his father knew that years later, that renegade daughter would be the symbol of the transformation that the company so needed? Maybe he would have done it differently, or maybe not, because men like Richard Grayson built empires on silences, and silences at one point turned into screams. And it was then that Michael heard the phrase. It came from an interview she'd given to an independent newspaper, and now it was circulating like wildfire on social media. Sometimes the one they underestimate is the one who carries the truth capable of destroying everything they built at the cost of silence. It was a simple but powerful phrase. One sentence. A warning. Or maybe a promise. Many interpreted that as a gesture of overcoming. Others, as a veiled warning. But the truth is that no one really knew what was going on behind that calm look. Had she really forgiven? Or was every step within that company part of something bigger? Something carefully calculated, a historical repair made with velvet gloves and a steel strategy. Michael didn't know. Maybe I never knew. But one thing was certain, the Grayson Empire would never be the same. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on justice, power, and reparation, don't leave without first subscribing to the channel. Here you will find many other real stories that inspire, provoke, and transform. If you made it to the end, comment below. I went all the way, so I know who really lived this journey with me. And of course, leave a like. This helps this video reach even more people who need to hear messages like this. And don't forget, the next video is already appearing here on the screen. Click now and continue with us in this marathon of stories that deserve to be told.